Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 5th live chat of the year, all about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships, also known as STPF. My name is Kat Song. I'm Communications Director at STPF, and I'll be your moderator today. This series of live chats is your opportunity to ask fellows your questions. We hope that through these chats, you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. Before we begin, if you'd like to view closed captioning for the session, just follow the link in the chat box. So today is the second to the last chat session of the year. With a different theme and set of fellows, we invite you to join us again in October for the final session before the application closes on November 1st. Today, we'll discuss how the fellowship has informed the careers of 3 fellows and how they remain engaged in policy and leadership roles after their fellowships. Folks who are applying this year by November 1st are applying to be considered for a position in the 2022-2023 fellowship class. That's our 50th anniversary class, so very special. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. Positions are a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. Are you eligible to apply? Do you want to learn about the application? Visit our application portal at the link in the chat box. Okay. On to the purpose of today's chat, getting answers to your questions. Use the question box in your menu bar as shown here. And if you like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and we'll focus on questions around today's theme, how fellows impact policy. And let's meet the fellows. Dr. Heather Huyck has worked in women's history and public history since 1971, with an MA in cultural anthropology and a PhD in American history from the University of Minnesota. Sponsored by the American Historical Association, she served as a congressional fellow in the House Committee on Interior and Insular Affairs from 1985 to 86. She's been a National Park Service historian and ranger and a professional staff member of the House of Representatives Subcommittee on National Parks. National Parks and Public Lands. Heather has traveled to 324 National Park Service sites and dozens of state, local, and private historic sites and museums. Her book, Doing Women's History in Public, a handbook for interpretation at museums and historic sites, was published last year. Dr. Danielle Haney is the U.S. Respiratory Lead for Patient Advocacy at Genentech. She champions the needs of patients and promotes inclusion of the patient voice at all stages of drug development. Prior to joining Genentech, she was a senior health science policy analyst at the National Institute for Neurological Disorders and Stroke at the National Institutes of Health. She was a 2015 to 17 Executive Branch Fellow at the NIH in the Office of Science Policy, Engagement, Education, and Communications. She received her PhD in immunology from the University of Pennsylvania. And Dr. Alejandro de la Puente is currently at the U.S. Department of Defense, working as an operations research analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation. Previously, he served as Associate Director of Science Alliance at the New York Academy of Sciences, where he worked to provide grad students and early career professionals with career development opportunities. A researcher in theoretical physics, Alejandro experienced a calling to serve society by engaging in education policy as a 2016 to 18 STPF Fellow in the Education and Human Resources Directorate at the National Science Foundation. Alejandro received his PhD in physics at the University of Notre Dame du Lac. So it's great to have you all today, you all here today. Before I go to questions from the audience, I have one to kick it off. Today's chat is about how fellows remain engaged in science policy and leadership roles after their fellowships. So each of you have charted a different course since completing your fellowship. How did your fellowship impact the trajectory of your career? Heather, would you mind kicking us off?
I went to the Hill knowing surprisingly little about it. The chairman of the subcommittee, a former high school science teacher, really respected my expertise and used it. And my fellowship ended up being a bridge between being an executive branch National Park Service employee. I took a leave of absence, but ended up being on the Hill for 8.5 years and doing all kinds of legislation, everything from Hawaii volcanoes to slavery at Natchez National Historical Park, and ended up really serving as a voice for telling the whole story and having the expertise to do it.
Anyone else want to jump in? Alejandro?
Yeah, no, I want to echo that. So it definitely gave me awareness. As you're kind of going through your PhD and into perhaps an academic career, you kind of forced to be a little narrow, as because so much pulling in so many directions. So I think the AAAS is a great kind of opportunity to become aware of all the other opportunities that exist in government, and actually everywhere, right? Not just in government. So I also knew very little about how really the government worked, and through the fellowship, and more than just the fellowship itself, but through the networks and through the basically being in Washington D.C., I learned what other opportunities I could be exploring for myself as I wanted, as I wanted to grow, not just in my expertise in science, but also in my expertise in science communication and outreach.
And I'll echo some of what my fellow panelists have said. I think for me, when I came to National Institutes of Health, I really thought of it as a funding agency for scientists, and really hadn't had an overall grasp of how instrumental it is in several different areas, including communicating science to the public. I was able to work in a communications engagement and policy shop that really allowed me to work with scientific professional societies and local and regional and national organizations that were focused on building health awareness in minority groups, and truly building some programming around that, providing funding opportunities, and really getting the science of the Institute out into the public so they can make actionable changes for their overall health. And then seeing that that type of office existed, where you can liaise with congresspersons, where you can liaise with media and other groups. I also saw several different avenues for a scientist to do a great deal of stakeholder engagement with the science behind you, and truly make a difference that way. So moving forward, I would say what mostly everyone else has said, that you are not narrowed as a scientist. Actually, you have several different things you can do, which likely may make your career charting a little more difficult, because you can do so many different things.
Yeah, and I want to say something. Thank you for saying that. I think you think, right, but then you realize, and also it comes with a caveat, right? Like you do have to strengthen a lot of these other skills, right? That's what the AAAS fellowship does during those 1 or 2 years. It allows you to focus on those skills you want to strengthen, so that you can open up make your aperture, more expansive.
We now talk about public historians. Historians traditionally simply replicated themselves. And so public history are all the different ways that we use history, which is what you both are talking about. And I think it's really important that we encourage people to think of many ways to serve and to make a difference, and also to serve our country. And serving our country is more than being in the military. We've all served our country with some pride and joy.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
Okay, here's a question from the audience. What kind of tasks did you work on day to day during your fellowship?
Everything.
Yeah, I was like, what are you going to start? I can start, and I can give what I was given when I first got in the door. So I went to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and what needed to be done was their 5-year strategic plan. And the individual who was the overall project manager of that had actually gone on maternity leave. So they kind of just said, hey, take it. And that involved a great deal of consensus building with about 7 different departments, determining what the science priority should be on the heart side, on the blood side, the lung side, and also sleep medicine, and really organizing those groups, getting feedback from the Institute director on what steps to take, and developing relationships. One other project that I worked on was actually a fashion show. Okay, so long story short, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute has a partnership with the American Heart Association for a red dress awareness campaign. It was actually started in the government. During the time there, I actually worked to make sure that we move that from the government over to the nonprofit space, as opposed to a government entity taking on a fashion show. It was really developing an MOU between a professional society and the government, and then thinking about ways that the government could still participate and use that opportunity to raise awareness of the science and really showcase the science during that opportunity. So we would make sure the Surgeon General was there. We'd work with the group to do like scientific videos that would be deployed during the overall event. So those are two areas that I worked on, but much more. So yeah.
I did everything from analyzing correspondence from angry people to try to figure out what the policy was and the best answer. That was the first day I was there. They handed me a letter. Actually, it was about this thick of letters. And I went through them and figured out, wait a minute, that's not what they're asking for, is illegal. So I wrote a nice but clear letter, drafted it for the chairman to sign. So I did that kind of thing. But what I most treasured was we worked from soup to nuts, beginning to end on legislation. So from the initial analysis of somebody else's bill or drafting a bill, to doing the research, to figuring out policy, to writing background statements, to writing briefing statements, to writing the chairman's opening statement, to writing questions, to getting witnesses, all those different aspects. I have a really deep appreciation for the complexity of our government and the Congress in particular. And so I think it's important to have those skills and to be able to communicate complicated bits of policy immediately. And in some ways, this is not negative, but it was some ways like an ongoing final oral. If you've gotten your final oral, you can do this. Although you're on CNN on the House floor answering a member of Congress's questions about why are you changing centuries of maritime law to protect underwater resources. So it's a constant intellectual challenge of what's in front of the subcommittee that you've never thought of in your life. It's not what you were trained for specifically, but now you have a very short period of time to figure it out and to make it happen and do something that makes a difference. And so intellectual stimulation was amazing.
And for me, I think I had a very unique opportunity to continue to be a researcher, but in a different field altogether. So, I worked in the Division of Undergraduate Education, and a lot of the money that NSF funds, it's for improving STEM education, or how we do science education at universities, at colleges. Basically, NSF has a huge program that gives people money to execute very innovative ideas on how to teach. And there hadn't really been an understanding of how to align theory or theoretical frameworks of teaching against, the execution of the practices that were being funded. So I had to do a lot of research on, and some of maybe the social scientists here will will know as institutional theory, how cultures develop. A lot of what happens at a university, right, happens because there's already a culture established. There are some, it's called the iron cage, right? It's really hard to change. Same with government, right? So you're trying to understand how the government is funding change in a way, right? And obviously there's a lot of nonprofits out there, even for-profits that are trying to do the same thing, right? But the government is doing it under the kind of the envelope of a public service, of a public good, right? Not expecting anything in return. So that the progress is slow, but it's happening, right? So I got to see through reading reports from PIs, right? Through reading all this, I got to see how much change they were creating, right? How much buy-in they were attaining from the leadership at the university. So that was great. But I also had an opportunity to do things outside of my placement through the fellowship, where I learned a lot about other agencies like EPA, NIH, and others, right? And that actually also gave me some of the skills that now I use in my day-to-day job.
And I'll just quickly say, I guess you guys can, it's reflected in all of our answers that based on the agency you're in and also which branch you were in, that your role in implementing policy will be different. Either some agencies create, others implement, others regulate. So I think that's something that you'll notice as well.
Thank you for
I'm
that.
getting to line up the policy, the politics, and the personalities. I mean, when Danielle, when you said what you did, I was really impressed because you managed to get so many different people on the same page. That's an incredible skill and accomplishment. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you. We got it done. And now on to another strategic plan, right?
And actually coming off of your last comment, Danielle, the next question from the audience sort of goes to that. How much impact do you feel you personally have had in formulating or implementing policy? I'm going to throw that to Danielle.
Okay, throwing it to me. That's a very good question. I will draw on just one of my experiences. I was asked by a former fellow to participate in a overall portfolio analysis of women's health at my institute. And we created this large work group of women really looking at how well we funded research. And that was actually in a response to the sex of the biological variable policy that was written by Drs. Collins and Clayton, and really assisting researchers in understanding how to implement that policy, also seeing how well we were already doing it, and then at the same time identifying where there were holes in research for heart, lung, and blood diseases. A lot of that work actually funneled over into other women's health work groups, and I'd like to think that we created several funding opportunities based on women's health research, and also identified some of the first underpinnings of maternal mortality morbidity, which is now a high ranking priority. So what I will say about policy, often it really takes a very long time in government sometimes to see where your impact is going. And that to me is one area that I saw some of the impact after that project had finished. I will say one other thing when it comes to another policy area I worked on was diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. Really having that conversation with program directors and implementing workshops that taught scientists how to engage with the public and think about inclusion in their trials, and then leading to more funding opportunities for them to do that. So that's one way at NIH where we kind of work within the policy realm and make an impact, is really directly to the scientists or to the creation of a scientific initiative.
One of the interesting things about being a congressional fellow or executive branch is that you come in assuming you're there for a certain limited period of time and you come in with credentials, both from your organization and AAAS and so on, and you get a certain amount of credibility that you might not have gotten in your own home area, branch, organization immediately. And you're also, in a funny way, not a threat to people because they figure you'll be gone. So you can actually, in a funny way, get more done when you're coming in and coming back out than you might otherwise. And the fact that these fellowships have a lot of credibility and respect makes a big difference for future fellows. So I want to say that, yes, we can get things done more than we might expect. And I was part of getting the national park system to shift from doing military and political history only, like lots of battlefields, to trying to tell the whole story. And both my boss, Bruce Vento, who was awesome, the subcommittee ranged from Dick Cheney to John Lewis. We had variety. And, trying to get that shift to include everybody was really crucial. And I was able to push the Park Service to make changes in its fundamental outline of history I could not have done from within the Park Service. And I was also able to push for a lot more of the history of American women and the history of African Americans. So you're in an interesting position that I don't know of anything else that's quite the same.
I'll just add that, and I echo that, policy or change or implementation of to achieve some change takes a while. So I went in with thinking, I would focus on policy and not at all, right? So I was more about sitting back and like looking at what we've done, right, and assessing, right, what has worked. And I think sometimes being in government now, sometimes we're asked to do things quickly, very quickly, and finding work groups all the time, finding consensus. Everybody wants to be heard, and actually everybody is heard, at least in my organization, right? It's sometimes nice to sit back and look at the picture, at the whole picture, and do an assessment and have the time to do so. So the fellows bring in that capacity, right? So when you're asked to do maybe something like that, take it as an opportunity to give to that organization that material, which perhaps would not be done fast enough, right, to get to that change you want. So that was more of my role.
Thank you, guys. A different topic. Can anyone speak to the idea of doing this fellowship near the end of your academic career rather than at the beginning?
Can you clarify what the end of the academic? Yeah.
Or maybe just later, maybe just answering it from a later career perspective. And if you don't have that personal experience, any thoughts on that?
There were fellows in my group who, two women in particular, who were much further along in their careers. And I think for them, it was a sabbatical and they got a lot done, but it also gave them the networks and the connections on the Hill. I would say mid-career, not late, but for me, coming mid-career worked much better than early career. But I joke that Hill politics are easier than academic politics, and that at least historically they have been, because people knew what they were doing, and that church politics are the worst of all. So in terms of being able to negotiate the politics, it helped me to be mid-career and not at the beginning. You get different benefits from different parts of your career.
I would say, I mean, I don't know what I was, but I definitely I had 4 years of academic experience after my PhD. And I really think that those helped me in different ways. And I appreciated the timing. And I have a lot of friends that have done or did their fellowship in their late career, and they stayed. And and they saw that nothing lost, everything was great. So I would say, do what feels right for you. I was already getting into wanting to do more science communication and outreach right at the beginning of my first postdoc, but I didn't have the role models that have made a transition like this. So having all these fellows now that you're getting to experience by just watching us or the other talks, it will provide you a lot of contrast and do what feels right for you.
Yeah, I agree. I came to the fellowship after 3 years of working in medical communications. So I had an opportunity there to think about scientific communications, but on the industry side of things. And I was curious about how to use those same skills and develop additional skills by doing that within the government. And on top of that, I was looking for some more professional development and to build a network as well that would allow me to see all the vast number of opportunities and also to realize the skills that I had yet to identify within myself. So it worked for me at that stage. And like everyone has said, there were some more advanced career individuals who yet use it as a sabbatical, some who stayed, and some who went back to academia after doing the fellowship at that time.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any advice for recent bachelor's degree graduates to get experience in science policy before or during grad school?
Yes. I would say during grad school, there are a lot of, I would say one of the good things is understanding that every PhD student won't go into a postdoc or be in academia. Several schools have started developing policy clubs or policy groups for students to gain experience. So I would say look for those opportunities at your university. And if they are not in the School of Biomedical Sciences, if you have a School of Government or anything of that nature, I would say look for cross-discipline opportunities where you can. When I was in graduate school, one of the policy things I participated in was a Hill Day. So a lot of the scientific societies have Hill Days where they, bring you to the Hill to advocate for science in whatever area that society participates in. So I would say that's another great way. And one other way is scientific writing workshops. Look for those opportunities as well. There are several organizations that do that. There's the Al and Ada science communication workshops. If you have opportunities to do those are some things that I would say. But others may have more personal responses.
I mean, I wish I had known about a lot of things, but now that I am kind of outside of that, I've learned that a lot of universities also have a DC office or campus. And when I moved to DC and I updated my LinkedIn, my alma mater's DC office contacted me so I can talk to students. So then I learned that students were doing programs, they were spending some time in DC doing something, and a lot of them were going to the Hill. Some of them went to different agencies in the government. So look for that office, right? And look for the programs that they offer and see what. And I'll give you an advice really quickly for those who are in any period of their career. Like just reach out to people that, if you want an opportunity, just reach out and you most likely will find it.
Mm-hmm.
Congressional staffers do a certain amount of self-protection and can be hard to identify who you want to talk to. But many of them really are very willing to have lunch or dinner with somebody. And so having been raised that I did not accept lunches or dinners from anybody, that was from my mother, and that kept me clean. I often would when Park Service people came to DC, I would go to my favorite Thai restaurant. I figured if I was doing dinner, it could be what I liked. And so we went to the Thai room and had dinner, and then they could ask me questions and have a taste of Washington and what the Hill was about. And I saw that as part of my work and job to help them be able to find out that congressional staffers were real people and that they could ask questions and get insights. And that really helped me when I needed witnesses or had questions. Hill people always need people that they can ask really stupid questions of, that nobody will ever bust them for how stupid the question was.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we were doing, I referred to the Maritime Legislation, I didn't understand the some aspects of what happens with a shipwreck. And so I had family members, geologists, who could help me understand shipwrecks and how they become embedded in the sea bottom, which was key to this legislation, believe it or not. I knew that they would never bust me for saying she didn't know squat about how shipwrecks become embedded on the bottom of the sea. And so if you can be that kind of, if you can develop a group of people who help you with that, it really works well. And I would say post-fellowship, the listserv is an incredible resource among the fellows. And most recently, early as COVID was starting, there was some of the best information I ever found about COVID from other fellows who had who are working on COVID. And I took that as solid information. And recently, there's been information about how to help people from Afghanistan. So that post-fellowship network of people that you figure we're in it to help each other has been invaluable. It's not why I went for the fellowship at all, but it's been great.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That the alumni network itself is tremendous, and what a value, and how strong it is. Yeah, it's going to be 50 years next year. So next up, actually, this question is for you, Dr. Huyck. Can you talk a bit about transferable skills from your background in social sciences and history to an STPF fellowship?
My training's in both history and anthropology, and we are all trained to do research, to analyze sources, to write, to take large amounts of information and put them into one-page briefing statements. I both honed those skills and applied them, and was able to reach out to previous networks when I needed witnesses or I needed people who I could ask stupid questions of. So I would say that I very much used my skills in terms of what I had gotten as a historian. And I started off in colonial history and then did the history of American women. So those might not seem applicable, but the skills that we got in grad school are very applicable to the Hill and very applicable to speaking. I mean, my boss didn't ever hear me speak until years after I'd been there in public. He heard me speak plenty when he asked questions, but you know, he never heard me in a public forum for years. But I did a lot of speaking with other groups and other people, and those skills are very applicable.
Yeah, and actually another question just came in related to that last one, to everyone. What are the skills that you learned in your PhD that helped you during your fellowship? Alejandro?
I mean, the one skill that probably sounds like the one everybody thinks about, but it's just being able to do research. You know, it sounds trivial right now that we have the internet and you can do anything, but no, I mean, doing good research takes, you know, not just looking for information on the web or in books, but knowing who to ask for information. And I learned that working at a lab, right? At a lab that had, you know, different types of research, and that at some points cross-cut to what I was doing. That's one. And the second one, I think, definitely not communication for me. I think I had to really work on those skills, especially now in my current job. But the other one, I think, was just being able to network with people from different countries, right? So I'm a theoretical particle physicist. I travel a lot, finding things you can relate to, finding things to talk about, finding ways to collaborate. Those things I learned as a scientist, and they have served me really, really well today. Some of the skills I wish I had learned that I'm learning now, I just mention a couple. Ones is how to have real crucial conversations. I think how to tell someone when you don't like something, how to tell someone when something, or how to tell someone how to do something, or how to manage people. And the other one is negotiating, or at least finding common ground. I think you, Danielle, have done that at your fellowship, and now I'm really kind of doing that myself, and it's actually pretty fascinating, right? Even if you don't get your complete way, it just feels good to get a way that everybody can agree on.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I don't know how many of you guys' experiences are in graduate school, but one of my things was I had to do a lot of negotiating with my PI. Managing up was a transferable skill that I learned in graduate school. Understanding what I needed to do so that I can, one, get to the next step in my project, or to get the feedback that I needed, how to make it as easy as possible to get that feedback, and really learning how to work with certain personalities so that some things that wouldn't get stalled and a project could continue. And I think that is a very crucial skill. And I think many of you are likely navigating that in your lab relationships, and you just don't realize it. Speaking, public speaking, speaking about your science as much as possible, I think is a transferable skill that we take for granted. I always hated, giving those presentations, those seminars, but like the speaking about your science, processing it while you're coming up with the presentation, and also answering those questions on the fly or thinking on your feet are some very good skills, because a lot of the times you have to quickly pivot when working in government or in policy, because your priorities for the day can shift, your priorities for the month can shift just based on a new finding. And writing as well. I think if you can understand how to succinctly write an abstract, then you are really set up for those one-pagers that you may have to work on in a policy office with under an hour to get as much information as possible back to the Hill or back to an NIH building one, so they can transfer it to the Hill. So I think those are some transferable skills.
I think one of the things, I love what y'all are saying. One of the things I learned on the Hill that has been so important is you're dealing in a position of power, and people are interacting with you in your power position. And I learned to be, as a principle of mine, neither impressed nor intimidated by anybody. So if I saw somebody was I got a really good sense, oh, this person's trying to impress me. This person's trying to intimidate me. And as soon as I identified that, I kind of hit a button and I was like, okay, that's not going to happen. And that has been an incredibly valuable approach. Just as a principle. No, you're not going to impress me. I am impressed by people, but on principle, no. If you're trying to intimidate me, forget it.
I just mentioned one thing, Kat. Obviously, it's really great when you remind things quickly and you can answer things quickly. But one thing I've learned now, and maybe a little bit before, is, and I call it an untransferable skill, is take your time. It's always good to tell someone, let me think about it. Try to get that right full answer, So there's a balance, right? Yep. As a scientist, you know your science, you can answer questions, but when you're dealing with portfolios that expand like everything in an organization that employs 600,000 people, there's no possible way you can know everything, and people do know that. And they would like you to they obviously sometimes they just want things in 10 minutes, so do your best, but there's a balance.
My boss had this horrible habit that he would keep asking you questions until you didn't know. And you had to get used to that was his style. And he would do it to other members of Congress. And once you realize that, then it was just, okay, that's his style. But it was important to figure that one out.
Yeah.
Here's a nice.
Important to anticipate his questions so that when he asked them, he asked somebody, what's an ohia tree about Hawaii? Unfortunately, I had thought, I have no idea what an ohia tree is all about. And my sister had been there on her honeymoon. So when he asked the member from Hawaii, "Well, tell me about ohia trees," and the member stammered. I was able to say, well, here's what it is. And you get information, you learn to get information wherever you need to. And you also learn how to bust people who are playing games, who are lying, who are misleading. You get pretty good at that, and that's a life skill.
True.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, here's one. What was the most exciting moment or accomplishment during your fellowship?
Yeah, that's a good one. I can start that one. I think the thing I enjoyed the most, I think, was when we got selected to do a symposium, and it was on the smart cities. So we called it Next Generation Cities and Communities. And what we wanted to do is, everybody's talking about technology, and we need the most, we need technology everywhere so that your city is smart. So we wanted to bring in the social component, right? Are you building a city that is inclusive when you were trying to think of all this technology? And we brought really amazing people from all over the United States to, so the fellowship facilitated that, right? That was to me the highlight of, and I met a lot of folks that I learned a lot from and continue to learn from today. So you'll have that opportunity if you become a fellow. So.
Anyone else with exciting accomplishments?
Well, I've mentioned several times the shipwreck legislation, and I can think of other times when we succeeded in something difficult that was really special. But I think the heart-stopping moment was we took the shipwreck legislation, which was, as I say, really about maritime resources, and we took it to the floor under a suspension of the rules, which means you have to get a 2/3 vote. And it was when Newt Gingrich was trying to take over, and he was ascending, and he decided to embarrass the Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, by sinking the shipwreck bill, and which he did at that point. And Wright, in his frustration at what was being done to him, wadded up a piece of paper that had notes on it about the bill and threw it at his top staffer and me. I think that was heart-stopping. We did go back under a rule rather than suspension of the rules, and I know I sound technical here, and got it passed. And so there's some sense of accomplishment with that, and a lot of other things that we've protected these resources in ways they never had been. So, but having a piece of wadded up paper with key points on it thrown at you by the Speaker of the House, that gets your attention.
Yeah, I don't have any, I don't know if I have anything as cool as that, but I will say one of the moments that really does stand out to me is some of the work I was able to do in sickle cell disease. We were asked by our institute director to really begin to work with the sickle cell community a bit more to understand some of their apprehension when it came to clinical trials, because we now had the advent of the CRISPR technology that the organization wanted to put into clinical trials in 5 years. And based on his request, we were able to gather patient advocacy groups in sickle cell. And I think there are very few times in government where you see everyone align on a particular topic. So not only was it a priority for my institute director, it was a priority for the Assistant Secretary for Health, it was a priority for the Surgeon General, and it was a priority for the Director of the Office of Minority Health at HHS. Because it was such a high priority, we were able to bring all those advocacy groups in, and they were able to have face-to-face conversations with all of those leaders. There were tears in the room when they each explained, how important this disease area was and kind of what they were going to be doing moving forward. And honestly, that was extremely impactful because that community for the first time really felt seen, and they felt it was genuine, and that relationship has continued, and there is now like an entire Cure Sickle Cell initiative based on that request and those interactions to ensure that those trials are successful whenever they do launch.
Those were great.
That's,
Thank you. Go ahead.
I was saying that's cool too. That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you talk about the ways in which you are involved in public policy today, professionally or personally, and at any level of government? And that could be anything from writing op-eds, serving on a local commission.
Hmm.
I'd love to write an op-ed. How do I do that? It's interesting because I recently transitioned into the pharmaceutical industry. So there are times where I feel, I won't say disconnected, but almost on a different side of things, a different perspective. And I've begun looking for opportunities to marry those two worlds. So as you guys know, there's a pricing conversation that's ongoing right now. And I do work in the overall in the government affairs section. So I'm looking for opportunities to kind of be involved with that discussion and also bring in, here's kind of some of the perspectives that we think about on the industry side, but this is kind of the perspective from, the NIH or other scientific agencies and how they do their science. That's
You're
what I would
being
like.
a bridge person.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's important for all of us in policy. When I left the Park Service, when I left the Hill, I went back to the Park Service, and the Government Performance and Results Act was new, and it talked about measurable outcomes, and the Park Service had never thought about those whatsoever. And from my Hill understanding, I realized how important it was to be able to tell the taxpayer, here's what you get for your money, and it's not just potholes filled, it's historic structures preserved, it's animal species that are thriving and so on. And so I was able to take my Hill experience and really apply it to getting the Park Service to do its first strategic plan and to continue. And then I have continued, particularly in the history of American women. And so that's what I put
Beautiful.
together. And so having the confidence and having the years of expertise building has made a difference in terms of being able to write that, but to write it in a way that it's designed to help a lot of people. It's not designed as an ego trip or certainly not to make money, but really what's something that a community needs and that can be used by many different people. And I think that that bridge aspect is really crucial. I think we're all talking about that.
I'll give you a really interesting non-answer to that question because it's very specific, at least where I am. But we all hear the phrase evidence-based decision making all the time, right? And so there should be evidence, collecting evidence, analyzing evidence, and assessing that, and then informing those people who will then go and formulate new policy, right? So think about that role also as my role is as an operations research analyst. So my role is to assess day-to-day operations of a department, right, in a specific portfolio. If we want to improve the processes inside an organization, whether it is the Hill, because that needs to improve always, right, constantly improving, whether it's the federal government, anything, right, there needs to be consistent and ongoing assessment and evaluation processes. So the analyst is also a critical role in any organization, specifically in government, because they're actually constantly monitoring whether these processes are working and providing that information to all the other agencies within your department that focus now on formulating the policy. So I like to think that I affect a lot of policy making, but maybe not like directly. So which is also, it also feels delicious and good.
I like that response. Thank you.
Well,
Let's see. How did your time as a fellow influence your identity as a scientist or historian?
question.
It reinforced it.
Yeah. I think it allowed me to create my own version of what a scientist. And that's a kind of a very powerful thing when you can actually take your own definition and, you know, give it to the public. So I think the fellowship allowed me to figure out the little ingredients that I needed in order to create my own definition and be respected for it, or recognized, or, you know.
I will say that it gave me a sense of understanding that scientists can solve the problems of the world. You're not limited. Maybe ego, boosted my ego. Like, you know, we have a certain set of skills, and when you hone those properly and effectively, and you have the support and the confidence, you can really go into any organization and identify needs, use some emotional intelligence, and get a lot done.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great.
I want to add that one of the things I most valued about the fellowship was some of the speakers that we had. We were given, you know, invite anybody you want. So we had Carl Sagan. We also had the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, John Walker, and everybody thought he was going to make a nice, friendly statement. And Bishop Walker came in and gave it to us and said, "You have such privilege. You have such an opportunity here. Now make it work and do what you should do." And it was very powerful. So having all the different speakers and getting together for the monthly dinners, I mean, the support AAAS gave us was really a key part of why we're still in contact.
Yeah.
That segs nicely into this next question that maybe the others can also chime in on. How did the fellowship impact your professional network? And what advice do you have for prospective fellows in how to make connections?
Well, it rapidly expanded my professional network. that's A. B, it gave me the skill set and bolstered the skill set of how to network and how to really just have a conversation with individuals, treat them as people, how to write an email for that informal interview, and also how to think about thinking about what you want next versus kind of who should you contact. So I know I want to roll in this. So that means I should search for these people. And if possible, you also do a search on former AAAS fellows. And more than likely, a former fellow is always going to want to chat with you. And I have this job that I have right now because of conversations I had with 2 former AAAS fellows who chatted with me about, you know, what it would be like as a scientist in a more external affairs policy engagement role at a pharmaceutical company. So that's one of the ways it has benefited me.
Yeah, and just echo that. It rapidly expanded. But one thing I did know was that you know, you have to nurture the relationships that you know you're interested in. And when I say nurture, I mean be prepared, right? Like you know, not just you're asking people to give you some time. They're also going to ask you to give them time. So be prepared, right? Be prepared because you run into all kinds of personalities. You run into a personality that's very much like you, and if you're very extroverted, then great conversation, right? But you might run into someone who's just completely different, but that could be the opportunity of your life. So learn how to learn about them first. Obviously, you have to like know their personality, but just be flexible and be accepting of people. Always be accepting of people because everybody is different. And you know, it was hard for me, right? Because I'm very, you know, I'm very outgoing, right? Like very extroverted, and sometimes I felt coldness, and I was like, well, that's just how people are, you know, some people. So be flexible.
I would say be flexible, but if you smell fun and games and mistreatment, we had a situation where the minority, and I'm not talking racial minority here, I want to be very clear, the minority staffer gave me a fax, and I was able to realize the fax had been played with. And what he was trying to do was introduce hunting into the Everglades. And he had lied about it by omitting this, fooling with the facts, FAX and FACTS also. And, I just waited till I did the research. I figured out what he left out. I waited till the hearing. And when it was about the number of deer shot in Big Cypress, and I knew that there were 6 out of 110,000 acres. And I just slipped it to my boss, and my boss said, "Oh, I see that last year there was 6 deer shot in 110,000 acres." And everybody had a great laugh. And that was the end of that effort to put hunting into the Everglades, which is right next to Big Cypress. So I agree, you want to be welcoming to people and you want to try to find out how to work with many people. But if somebody's trying to play games, I'm happy to help bust them. And I learned that in that
That's true.
situation.
We have time for just one more question. How did your time as a fellow change your view of the government, if at all, or the role of science in policymaking?
Great question. I mean, it just allowed me to understand how complex, diverse, and allow me to see the incredible work that's happening in it. That's just something I was not aware of at all. It blew my mind, from driving medical research to changing how we teach kids in a classroom, to securing that our park spaces are safe and are as amazing as you want them to be when you visit them. So it's pretty crazy amazing, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. If anyone wants to jump in, I wanted to ask, sorry, one more thing. If what one piece of advice do you have for applicants?
Do it and be your authentic self when you are writing your essays and personal statements, and really tell your story, so that everyone knows, or the viewer knows, that the fellowship is really the next best step for you in your professional development and your career.
Yes and yes. And the third one is, I tell you because I applied twice, and the first one I didn't make it, obviously, and have someone who you do not know, but who is in a role that is not purely like yours, academic, perhaps if you're doing an academic, career right now, have them read and give you advice on these materials that you're preparing. Make sure you do not know these people. You know them, you see them, but it's so important that somebody understands what you're trying to say, right? Because that's what AAAS is looking for. And one more thing, yeah, it's great to get outside your comfort zone because that's how you grow. But don't be too outside for application. So, the first time I applied thinking I wanted to do this, right? And totally outside my expertise, but I was really passionate about it. Okay, next time I said, this I know a little bit more, and I'm still very much almost as equally passionate about it. So the second time was, I refined what I wanted. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you felt at the first time. Just focus yourself on something you really can, deliver to that finish line.
And you want to make sure that the office that you go to is a good fit for you. And I mean that in terms of, on the Hill, you better think about your politics. One woman went to an office of a senator whose politics were diametrically opposed to her own. And we said, why would you give free help to somebody who's everything you can't stand? Well, she left that pretty quickly. But, your high level free help. And that's a pretty good deal for them. And you want to make sure you're in an office where people respect each other, where they're friendly, where the member of Congress or whoever the boss is supportive and positive of you and respects what you're doing and who you are. You don't want to spend your time, and some of the offices are really pretty nasty to each other. You don't need that. You're an asset, and enjoy it. Have fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, Heather, Danielle. It's been such a pleasure, and we really appreciate the time that you gave us here today.
Thank
It's
you.
our pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great to meet you all.
Good luck.
And thank you to you all watching us today. We'll send a recording of the conversation to you soon. The STPF application, as you may know, is open through November 1st. And the last live chat is on October 13th. The topic is Ask a Fellow Anything. If we didn't get to your question today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. That's AAAS.org. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And great to meet you all.